Today we're going to talk about boxed text. Not just how to use it and how to write it, but also why you should use it, and also why you shouldn't. But first we're going to go back in time, all the way back to 1976. 2 years ago, here in 1976, D&D was being published for the first time. Although the rulebooks included a sample map introducing the concept of dungeon adventures, the key for the map was instructional. It was meant to showcase various dungeon design techniques, and wasn't a dungeon that you could actually, run for your players. But now, in 1976, we've reached year one for published adventures. Dave Arneson's Temple of the Frog will appear in supplement to Blackmoor. We Warriors is publishing Pete and Judy Kerriston's Palace of the Vampire Queen. The Metro Detroit Gamers are releasing the original edition of Lost Caverns of Sojkolmth by Gary Gygax, and Judges Guild are publishing both the Gen Con 9 Dungeons and City State of the Invincible Overlord. And all of these adventures are trying to figure out how to format their scenarios so that dungeon masters have the essential information they need to run them for their players. In Palace of the Vampire Queen, for example, the Kerstons used a completely tabular key. Each room listed the creatures encountered there, the hit points for those creatures, and then a brief list of the contents of the room, which was generally just a list of the treasure that could be looted. In combination with the map, the dungeon master was expected to improvise the description of these rooms. Meanwhile, in the Gen Con 9 dungeons, Judges Guild was way ahead of the curve, as they often were in the 1970s. Bob Blake recognized that a key with better organization would make it easier for dungeon masters to run the adventure, and so his room keys featured a DM-only section. This wasn't quite boxed text, but in practice it was very similar. There would be a description of the room with information that was appropriate for the players, and then the DM-only section would explain what additional details could be discovered by investigating the scene. Boxed text as we know it today wouldn't arrive until 1979, when Harold Johnson and Jeff R. Leeson wrote Lost Tamochan, The Hidden Shrine of Lubatum, and released it as a convention module for Origins. Originally, this descriptive text was just indented, but in 1980, TSR reissued the module as C1, The Hidden Shrine of Tamrachan, and the room descriptions were boxed for the first time. Here's an example from Meffitz and Magman, the sample scenario from my book So You Want to Be a Game Master. You're near the bottom of a steeply sloped, rocky outcropping in a heavily forested area. Above you, a dark mass of stone bulges out of the slope. At its center, partly obscured by verdant green growth sagging from the top of the bulge, is a ragged-edged black hole that punches back through the rock. In front of this cave entrance, there's a slag of broken rock forming a kind of natural portico that extends out 20 or maybe 25 feet to the edge of the tree line. 3 large mounds of wet mud have been heaped at various points on the slag. The reason I like to go back in time like this is because it can often show us why things are the way they are. Boxed text was invented to solve a very specific problem. The dungeon key for a room could be packed full of information. How could you, as the DM, quickly identify what information the players should have so that their characters could interact with the room? Make sure that you don't miss anything they should know, but also make sure you don't accidentally tell them anything that they shouldn't. Boxed text elegantly solved this problem by literally taking the information that everyone walking into the room should immediately perceive and nothing else, and literally putting it in a box. By understanding that purpose, we can gain a better understanding of how to create and use our own boxed text. Someone else who likes to take inspiration from the past and use it to create fantastic adventures today is GUICube, the sponsors of today's video. Building on the success of their epic Red Star Rising campaign adventure series and the dark and twisted world of GYZAENGAXX, GUICube is hours away from launching their Kickstarter for the Tomb of GYZAENGAXX, an enthralling adventure homage to Gary Gygax and all the classic adventures of yesteryear. In fact, let's hitch a ride with the Tomb as it journeys back to the 21st century and its crowdfunding campaign. Oh, wow. You really don't realize how much you'll miss color until it's gone. Okay, back to boxed text. When you see boxed text in a published adventure today, it's usually written out like a script that you're supposed to read to your players. If that works for you, great. I'm a classically trained actor, so I'm pretty good at reading a script and making it sound natural, as if it was something that I was actually saying. Of course, a lot depends on the script, too. If the language is too florid or lyrical or awkward, then no matter how good the performance, it still won't feel like you. If you want to get better at reading scripted box text, though, it doesn't hurt to practice. You can even do this when reading through a published adventure for the first time. Just read the box text out loud, get familiar with it, feel the words in your mouth. The more you practice, the better you'll get. But there are a lot of people who will never be comfortable reading box text, and that's fine. In fact, no matter how talented you might be at performing scripted text, there are a lot of disadvantages to it. It takes longer to prep. It also locks you into a specific presentation of the room. For example, if the PCs enter a room through the window instead of a door, how would that change what they see? What if the lights are turned off instead of turned on? What if you're running a dynamic dungeon and NPCs have moved through the area searching for the PCs? Should there be signs of their search and passage here? So what I'll do when prepping adventures for my own use is to use bullet points for my box text. The basic principle remains the same. I'm still taking the initial description of the room and putting it in its own special section of the room key. But instead of scripting exactly what I'll say, I'm just putting the essential information in a bullet point. For example, instead of the full boxed text I read earlier from Mefferts and Magman, I might just jot down 3 quick bullet points. Rocky outcropping, a cave entrance in the middle of a slag of broken rock, 3 mounds of mud visible. Now, in doing this, I'm also benefiting from the fact that I'm not trying to communicate what's in my head to the thousands of dungeon masters running the published adventure. When you're writing an adventure for yourself, you still want complete, well-organized notes for your future self, but you can also trust your future self to, know what you were talking about. Using these bullet points at the table will, of course, require you to improvise the actual description of the area to your players. Now, what I found works best is to, first, use the bullet points to conjure up a mental image of the location. Then simply describe what you see in that image the same way you describe something from your daily life to your friends. As I'm giving the description, I'll also use the bullet points as a sort of informal checklist. Have I mentioned the cave entrance? Yes. Have I mentioned the mounds of mud? Yes. Good. Description done. What do you want to do? The result in my experience is a friendly, casual, conversational tone. We're all just talking to each other, and it's easy to have a seamless back and forth with the players as we talk about the scene and what they see and what they do. And this, too, is a skill that will improve with practice. Okay, but let's say you're running a published adventure and you don't want to read the scripted box text in the book. Well, you could take the time to rewrite all the box text as bullet points, but that sounds exhausting. What you want is this. This is your best friend. Simply read through the box text and highlight the specific points of interest. Let's take a look at our example from Mefferts and Magman again. You can see that by highlighting rocky outcropping, cave entrance, slag of broken rock, and 3 large mounds of wet mud, we've created a list very similar to bullet points and which can be used in the same way. This is a technique I picked up from Brendan Stracek at Necropraxis, and you can find a link to his original article expanding on these ideas in the Font of All Knowledge down below. The great thing is that it can work just as well even if the published module doesn't feature box text at all. These are the dreaded wall of text room keys, where everything has been dumped indiscriminately into a rambling account of the room's contents, and you have to try to rummage your way through the heap. A few seconds of work with your trusty highlighter, though, and you'll end up with a room key that's infinitely easier to juggle in the middle of a session. Okay, let's leave published adventures behind for the moment, and flip back to writing your own boxed text. Whether you're prepping scripted box text or bullet points, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, of course, the goal of your box text is to describe the game world, so writing good box text has a lot to do with prepping really good dungeon rooms. Exploring that topic in full is beyond the scope of this video, but you can find some useful tips in my video on description formulas, which I'll link to in the Font of All Knowledge. Now, in that video, I talk about the importance of persistent description. Your description of the room shouldn't end when you finish reading the box text. Instead, you continue adding new details as the PCs take action within the room. The persistent description isn't just great at drawing the players into the scene and immersing them in the game world, it's also liberating for your box text. It's important for your box text to include a broad and complete description of the room, but you don't need to try to cram everything into your box text. In fact, you really shouldn't. You want your box text to be short, pithy, and to the point. You want to describe the room quickly and then toss the ball to your players so that they can start taking action. On that note, also be aware of the reaction point. This is the point in your description of a scene where the players want to take action. I also have another video that looks at the reaction point in detail, and the link for that will be in the Font of All Knowledge too. But the short version is that you almost always want the reaction point to come at the end of the description. Hit the players with it, and then let them immediately react, like a tennis player returning a volley. I'll be doing more advanced game mastery videos on dungeon design in the future, so if you don't want to miss out on those, join me in journeying into the labyrinth of the YouTube algorithm, make your detect traps check, and click the subscribe button. While you're down there, make sure to visit the tomb of GYZAENGAXX. I've included a link in the Font of All Knowledge which will take you to their Kickstarter campaign for this mega adventure, which is running right now. I'm really excited about the tomb, which is being developed by GUI-Cube in collaboration with Gary Gygax's son Luke Gygax as a tribute to his father's legacy as a co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons and countless legendary adventures. As part of GUI-Cube's sponsorship of the Alexandrian in this video, we're also currently running a community challenge on the Alexandrian Discord to design Easter eggs for the tomb. Join us there to check out entries like the Ayum Billiard Ball, the Duck of Doom, and the Well, Actually. GUI-Cube is offering prize packages to the best entries, and I'd love to be surprised by whatever Easter eggs you can cook up. So please swing on by. Good gaming. I'm Justin Alexander, and I'll see you at the table.